In this video, we're going to be taking a look on pages Access 64 and 65, which is entitled To Create Calculations. After watching this video, you should be able to build calculations on a form and be able to move controls on a form. Text boxes are generally used to display data from underlying fields. The connection between the text box and field is defined by the control source property on the Data tab of the property sheet for that text box. A text box control can also display a calculation. And to create a calculation in a text box, you enter an expression instead of a field name in the control source property. And of course, an expression is a combination of field names, operators such as add, subtract, divide, and multiply, and functions such as sum, count, or average that results in a single value. And of course, as you take a look on your screen right here, or on page Access 65 on table C5, these are just some sample expressions that you could use. And of course, if you're familiar with some of the Excel expressions or formulas that's on there, some of those are pretty similar to what you can use on Access. Now, there is a few little changes that we will take note of that's on there, because instead of using for an example, on Excel, using cell addresses like A1 or such as that, you're going to be using field names. And those field names need to be surrounded by square brackets that's on there. And of course, we notice that here would be an example of using the sum function to add all the values in the salary field. Or we could multiply the price field here by 1.05, which is going to add 5% to the price field. Or we can add in subtotal and shipping that's on there, so it's going to be adding two different fields together. Or we can actually use the average function to find maybe the average freight. Or you can actually even use the date function to display the current date in the form that's on there. So if you put equals date and then open parenthesis and close parenthesis, that's using a date function. Or if you actually want to display the words page as well as have a page number that's on there, there's an example expression as well. And you can take a look at some of the other sample expressions as well. Going back to the Access database now, and if we take a look on step 1 on page Access 64, it tells us that we want to right-click the Tours Entry Form tab. And then we want to switch to the Design View. So we want to click on Design View, and that's going to take us back to our Design View. Now here we want to add the tour end date calculation just below the duration text box. Now first we'll need to resize the city and state abbreviation fields because they're a little bit large for our use on here. So step 2 tells us that we want to click the city label. So we're going to click on the city label here, and then we're going to press and hold the shift key, and then we're going to click on the city text box. And then still while holding your shift key down, we're going to click on the state abbreviation label and the state abbreviation text box. So in this case, we've selected 4 controls together. Once you have these 4 controls all selected together, you can then release your shift key on your keyboard, and then we want to go and click on the Arrange tab, which is in our Form Design Tools. We click on the Arrange tab, and then we want to go and click the Size Space button, and that of course once again is in our Sizing and Ordering group. And in this case, we are going to click to shortest. So we're going to change this up a little bit. So when we click to shortest, we now notice that with the city and state abbreviation fields resized, we're ready to move them to make some room for a new control to calculate the tour end date. So they were a little bit wide because of the type of text box it was. Now they've kind of shrunk a little bit, so we've got a little bit more room to kind of play around with now. Now in step 3, it tells us that we want to click a blank spot on the form to deselect the 4 controls. So just select anywhere else to deselect the 4 controls. And then it tells us that we want to click the state abbrev text box. So we go down to the state abbreviation text box, and that's going to select it. And it tells us that we want to use our four-headed mouse pointer, which if you point to the edge of that selected text box, we want to move it down. So we're going to move this down a little bit, just to where it looks good right above the category that's on there. And then we want to do the same thing for the city text box. So we're going to click on the city text box, point to the edge using our four-headed black arrow, and with our mouse pointer we're going to move it down as well. Once we have that, now what we're going to do is to add the calculation, which we're going to add this calculation on here to the end date on there. To determine the tour end date, the tour start date plus the duration is what we're going to be looking at. And we have to start by adding a new text box to the form between the duration and the city text boxes. So we're going to have to add in a brand new text box. And to do this, we move on to step 4. And step 4 tells us that we want to click the Design tab. And of course that's still in the Form Design Tools. And then next, we have all of these different controls that we can actually input in. And this is some of the different controls that we talked about previously in one of our previous videos. But we want to select this option right here. And this is the text box. And it's a box with an A, B, and a line next to it that's on there. That is the text box button. Once we click on that, that selects the type of object that we want to input in. Then we need to move our insertion point into the form. And we want to click between the duration and the city text boxes to input in the new text box. So we're just going to put our insertion point somewhere right in here, and we're going to click. Now, we can always move this, but you want to have that unbound text box in between the duration and the city. Now, of course, adding a new text box will automatically add a new label to the left of the text box. Now, in step 5, it tells us that we want to click on the new text 20 label. So you want to click on the left part here, the text 20 label. And then we want to double click where it says text 20. And here we're going to type in tour end date. And of course you notice that the label control will automatically resize as you continue typing on this. Once you have that, you want to press enter. Now of course with the label updated, and of course you can notice that on the format tab over here with our property sheet still open, the caption has updated as well, and that of course that is what is actually going to be located inside of that label. So with our label updated to correctly identify the text box to the right, we're now ready to enter the expression to calculate the tour end date. Now you have to be very precise on this part, because otherwise it will not calculate correctly and you will not receive the correct results. So in step 6, be sure to follow this step very closely. It tells us that we want to click the new text box, and that's where it says unbound. And of course remember, this is an unbound text box because it does not contain any data right now. It's not tied to any field in any table. Once we have that selected, it tells us that now we want to go over to our data tab in our property sheet. And of course, much smaller list of things that we can work with. And then it tells us that on the control source, and that's the top line that's on here, it tells us that we want to click on the control source property, and here we are going to type in =, square bracket open, which is just to the right of the P. You don't have to hit your shift key. If you hit your shift key in that case, it's going to give you the kind of the little squiggly type bracket. We want the square bracket. Now on this one, make sure that you do spell this correctly and that you do use the proper capitalization where it has it on here. This is going to be tour start, and of course tour is going to be capitalized, and we have start, ST, the S is going to be capitalized. So we have tour, start, and then date, and date is going to be capitalized as well. And then we're going to close our bracket. Then next, we're going to hit in our plus sign, open up your bracket because there's no spaces between this. Then we're going to type in duration with a capital D. And then close your bracket. Once you have that information input in, and like I said, double check step 6 to make sure you've typed it in correctly, then you can press your enter key. Now once you press your enter key, you can also input this in on your text box as well. You can input it in on the control source, or you can actually type it in where it says in the unbound text box there as well. Now a few things to keep in mind is that number 1, all expressions entered in a control start with an equal sign. Now when referencing a field name within an expression, you need to use square brackets, not parentheses. So you don't hit Shift 9 or Shift 0. Those are not the keys that you need to be hitting. You need to hit the keys that are directly to the right of your letter P on your keyboard, and that is the square brackets. And not the curly brackets, which is when you hit your Shift and then the keys directly to the right of the P. Because the square brackets need to surround the field name. Now in an expression, you must type the field name exactly as it was created in the table design view. But you do not need to match the capitalization. So personally, I like to match the capitalization just to be on the safe side. However, the textbook does mention you do not need to match the capitalization. So if you didn't match the capitalization right off the bat, you're okay with that. But personally, I like to match it that way just to be on the safe side. And some previous versions of Excel, you had to match everything, or Access, excuse me. With previous versions of Access, you had to be very precise on everything. So that's where I've kind of gotten to an old habit of doing that. But you do not need to match the capitalization, but I do just out of force of habit that's on there. Once we have this expression input into our control source, which we see that it's copied in to, and that's what we see in on our text box now, we want to move on to step 7. And it tells us that we want to click the View button. So we're going to go back to our Form View, and this switches to our Form View. And now we can take a look, and we want to click the value in the Tour Name text box. And of course that's going to be where it says the Breeze Bay Shelling, and that's the tour name text box. What we're going to do is we're going to go to our Sort and Filter, and we're going to click back on the Ascending button, and that's going to take us back to the AIM Ski Club. Next, it tells us that we're going to select the 7 in the duration box, and we're going to change that to 5, and then press Enter. Notice that the tour end date has changed on there because it's calculated by an expression, and it's automatically changed to 5 days after the start date to reflect the new duration value. The Update Tours entry form with the tour end date calculation for the AIM Ski Club is now shown on your screen. So now you can see a little bit more on how you can do some calculations, and really how it would be easier for the end user to utilize this, because you can imagine when you're inputting in this information, especially if you're talking to someone on the phone, using this type of calculation would actually be very helpful, because then if they would say, well, what day does that end? Instead of having to sit there and calculate up, okay, that's a 5-day duration, and then calculating it up, you can actually take a look on your screen, and there is the tour end date using that calculation. And that concludes the information that's on pages Access 64 and 65 in which we created calculations. In the next video, we're going to be modifying the tab order.